Strait of Hormuz, 4:03 p.m., February 1st, 2026. The day Iran attempted to paralyze global trade. Over 200 Iranian fast attack craft and drones emerged from the jagged coastal shadows. It was the largest asymmetric naval operation attempted in modern history. A swarm of steel, speedboats, suicide drones and coastal cruise missile batteries focused on a single target. The plan was a calculated, high-stakes gamble to overwhelm the USS Abraham Lincoln with raw numbers. By saturating the carrier's defenses with low-cost units, they hoped to exhaust the American magazines. Tehran believed the giant would fall under the weight of 200 simultaneous suicide strikes. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard believed the Lincoln was a vulnerable, outdated relic of a past era. They assumed that 200 incoming targets would confuse the Aegis radar and blind the ship's sensors. They calculated that American sailors would succumb to panic under the pressure of the closing swarm. Beijing and Moscow watched from afar, waiting for the symbolic fall of a Western superpower. But Iran made 7 catastrophic, life-altering tactical miscalculations that would lead to their ruin. The first mistake was believing that their massive mobilization had gone unnoticed by American eyes. The second was underestimating the lethal integration of the carrier's escort destroyers and their fire. At 4:05 p.m., the first layer of the American defensive umbrella was activated across the horizon. The EA-18G Growlers flooded the airwaves with a wall of digital noise and electronic interference. Iranian drone operators lost their video feeds in seconds as their controls turned into static. Suicide drones began to wobble and lose their GPS locks, wandering aimlessly over the blue water. The swarm's coordination was shattered before a single kinetic shot was fired by the fleet. Admiral Richardson stood on the bridge of the Lincoln, watching the red dots fade on the screen. "General quarters," he commanded, his voice steady as the automated battle alarms echoed below. The strike group was a floating fortress of advanced American steel and high-tech weaponry. USS Abraham Lincoln CVN-72 carried a lethal air wing ready to rain destruction from the clouds. USS Mobile Bay CG-53 provided the primary Aegis umbrella, tracking hundreds of targets at once. USS Spruance and USS Halsey moved into defensive positions, their VLS cells primed for launch. 4 American warships stood against 200 Iranian suicide units in a fight for the strait. The Iranian objective was clear: sink a Nimitz-class carrier and change the course of history. They did not realize they were sailing into a precision-engineered kill zone designed for this moment. The Iranian fast boats ignored the loss of their drones and continued their high-speed charge. They utilized blind navigation and preset compass bearings to close the 20-mile gap. Armed with C-802 missiles and improvised explosive charges, the crews embraced a martyrdom fate. The IRGC leadership believed their sacrifice would finally break the American grip on the Gulf. They were blind to the 20mm Phalanx Gatling guns already slewing toward their fiberglass hulls. Every second brought them closer to the range of the Navy's most secretive and lethal defenses. The water churned white as 120 engines pushed the Iranian Navy toward a wall of tungsten. By 4:07 p.m., the USS Mobile Bay opened the engagement with a thunderous roar of missiles. 2 RIM-116 rolling airframe missiles streaked toward the lead suicide boats with perfect tracking. Massive orange fireballs erupted on the water's surface, raining hot metal into the Persian Gulf. The invincible swarm was starting to bleed in the water as the first wave met its end. Admiral Richardson then authorized the use of the Odin laser system to target the remaining drones. Invisible beams of concentrated light burned through drone optics, causing them to plummet silently. The Iranian cheap swarm was meeting high-tech American light in a lopsided technological war. The F-35C Lightning IIs began their descent from 60,000 feet, invisible to Iranian radar. Each stealth jet carried GBU-53B Stormbreaker smart bombs designed for moving maritime targets. The pilots used synthetic aperture radar to lock onto every individual speedboat in the swarm. "Bombs away," the lead pilot communicated, as dozens of precision munitions fell from the sky. The first wave of 30 Iranian fast boats disappeared instantly in a series of synchronized blasts. Fiberglass hulls shattered as the 200-pound warheads detonated with surgical and terrifying accuracy. The Iranian commander in Bandar Abbas watched his tactical screen go dark in a matter of seconds. The remaining Iranian boats reached the inner ring of the carrier strike group's defense perimeter. They were now within 5 miles of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the closest they would ever get. This was the moment the IRGC had practiced for years in the shallow waters of the Gulf. The final charge was supposed to deliver the killing blow and match the propaganda billboards. But the Lincoln's response was not just defensive, it was a total and overwhelming offensive. The ship's hull bristled with firepower as every weapon system reached its maximum rate of fire. The sea boiled with the impact of thousands of rounds, turning the horizon into a wall of lead. The third miscalculation was the belief that the carrier would only defend itself during the fight. Admiral Richardson looked at his tactical officer and gave the order they had all prepared for. Launch the Tomahawks. Strike the coastal batteries and every command node on the mainland. The USS Spruance and USS Halsey pivoted their focus toward the Iranian shoreline 10 miles away. The steel covers of the vertical launch systems blew off as the first RGM-109s ignited their engines. A low guttural roar filled the air as the first 50 missiles rose on pillars of white smoke. The American retaliation was moving at 500 miles per hour toward the heart of the IRGC. The Tomahawk missiles did not just fly straight, they communicated with each other in flight. They used terrain matching and GPS to navigate the complex Iranian coastline with ease. The first 40 missiles were programmed to find the hidden coastal caves and mobile launchers. Iranian crews on the shore tried to reload their missile tubes, but they were already too late. The Tomahawks performed a high-altitude pop-up maneuver before diving onto their targets. Every radar installation, every fire control system, and every bunker was marked for death. The Iranian eyes along the strait were being poked out by the precision of American steel. The Iranian fast boat crews saw the missiles flying over their heads toward their own homes. The realization that their land bases were under attack broke the last of their fanatical resolve. Some boats tried to turn back, while others drifted aimlessly as their engines failed them. The F-35s overhead continued their work, using 25-meter cannons to strafe any vessel still moving. Liquid-cooled barrels poured fire into the hulls of the retreating and broken Iranian fleet. The invincible IRGC Navy was being systematically dismantled by an invisible and lethal enemy. In the span of minutes, the pride of the Iranian maritime force had become a collection of wrecks. At the military port of Bushehr, the first Tomahawk struck the primary naval coordination pier. The explosion was so powerful, it lifted 4 docked Iranian frigates out of the harbor water. The very heart of Iran's regional naval power was being ripped out in a single afternoon. Secondary explosions from ammunition depots sent mushroom clouds of black smoke into the air. The Iranian generals in their bunkers realized their communication lines were failing one by one. The rain of fire was no longer a threat. It was a reality that was erasing their entire military. The cost of the blockade was being paid in the total destruction of their strategic infrastructure. The fourth miscalculation was the speed of the American response and its sheer global scale. The US Space Force satellites had tracked the thermal signatures of the launches from the start. Data was fed directly into the Tomahawk guidance systems in real time, adjusting for movement. Even the mobile trucks that tried to hide in the mountains were found by the Reaper drones. The American response was a symphony of integrated warfare that Iran could not hope to match. Every time an Iranian battery fired a shot, a Tomahawk was already halfway to its position. The Iranian defense was a series of isolated failures against a unified and unstoppable force. On the deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the tempo of operations remained calm and professional. The crew moved with the precision of a clock, reloading systems and monitoring the airspace. There was no panic, only the steady execution of a battle plan that had been refined for decades. The propaganda in Tehran had promised a carrier burning in the water and bodies in the sea. Instead, the only things burning were the Iranian fast boats and the coastal bases that sent them. Admiral Richardson checked the status of his ships and found 0 damage and 0 casualties. The carrier was not just surviving the swarm, it was thriving in the heart of the conflict zone. The fifth miscalculation was the assumption that the United States would hesitate to strike. Iran believed that the threat of a wider war would keep the American missiles in their tubes, but the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is a red line that cannot be crossed without fire. The reign of 200 Tomahawks was the answer to 40 years of threats and regional coercion. As the first block of the battle concluded, the Iranian Navy had lost 60% of its capability. The strait was no longer a choke point for the world. It was a graveyard for the IRGC. The battle was far from over, but the outcome had been decided in the first 12 minutes. The secondary wave of Iranian aggression began with a desperate command from the mainland. 50 hidden coastal missile batteries received the final authorization to fire their remaining stocks. Dozens of Noor and Qadr anti-ship missiles breached the surface of their canisters in a cloud of fire. This was the saturation attack Iran had promised for decades, a lethal forest of low-flying steel. The missiles skimmed mere feet above the white-capped waves to avoid the strike group's radar. Tehran's commanders believed that even the Aegis system could not stop a barrage of this density, but they were about to discover the terrifying efficiency of American multi-layered missile defense. Admiral Richardson watched the new swarm of high-speed signatures bloom on the tactical display. "Engage the incoming vampires and maintain the Tomahawk strike rhythm," he ordered his staff. The USS Mobile Bay responded instantly, launching a salvo of SM-6 extended-range interceptors. The sky above the Strait of Hormuz was etched with the white trails of American countermeasures. Inland, the second wave of Tomahawk missiles began their final descent onto the Iranian launchers. The American strategy was a dual threat, killing the missiles in flight while erasing the source. Not a single Iranian operator would have the chance to reload their tubes for a second shot. The fourth miscalculation was the belief that their underground silos were safe from orbital eyes. The US Space Force had already mapped every missile city buried deep within the coastal mountains. As the Iranian crews celebrated their launch, the first Block 5 Tomahawks were already diving. These specialized variants carried tandem charge warheads designed to penetrate reinforced concrete. The earth shook as the mountain entrances collapsed, sealing the Iranian missile crews inside. Secondary explosions from stored fuel and warheads turned the underground facilities into furnaces. The pride of the IRGC missile force was buried under thousands of tons of Persian limestone. On the surface of the water, the remaining Iranian fast boats attempted a final suicidal charge. The USS Halsey and USS Spruance moved to intercept, their 5-inch Mark 45 guns roaring in unison. Each high-explosive shell hit the water with the force of a thunderclap, shredding fiberglass hulls. The Iranian sailors found themselves trapped between a wall of fire and the sinking wrecks of their fleet. There was no room for maneuver, no cover to be found in the open, blood-stained water of the Gulf. The swarm had been reduced to a collection of burning pyres and men clinging to floating debris. The American destroyers operated with a cold mechanical precision that offered no hope for escape. At 4:18 p.m., the Lincoln's electronic warfare suite initiated a total blackout of the Iranian coast. The EA-18G Growlers intensified their jamming, severing the link between Tehran and the front lines. Iranian generals found their screens going dark as their fiber optic and satellite nodes were hit. The Tomahawks had targeted the specific microwave towers and relay stations used for military data. The Iranian leadership was now blind, deaf, and unable to coordinate any further maritime resistance. They could only watch from the hills as the horizon glowed with the fires of their burning navy. The American rain of fire was systematically dismantling the regime's ability to wage modern war. The fifth miscalculation was underestimating the lethality of the Navy's new directed energy weapons. The USS Abraham Lincoln's high-energy lasers continued to track and engage the smaller drones. Silent, invisible beams of light superheated the drone engines until they exploded in mid-air. The Iranian crews watching from the shore couldn't understand why their drones were falling. There were no missile trails, no sounds of gunfire, just a sudden and total rain of falling metal. The technological gap between the two forces was no longer a margin, it was a total chasm. The swarm concept had been rendered obsolete by the speed of light and American engineering. The seventh wave of Tomahawks targeted the IRGC naval headquarters and the primary shipyard. The missiles flew low through the harbor, avoiding the remaining Iranian point defense systems. They struck the dry docks, where Iran's newest destroyers were undergoing final preparations. The massive structures buckled as the warheads detonated, causing a catastrophic chain reaction. Decades of naval investment and billions of dollars vanished in a series of bright flashes. The Iranian shipyard, once a symbol of self-sufficiency, was now a twisted graveyard of cranes. The message from the Pentagon was clear. Any asset used for the blockade would be destroyed. While the missiles fell, The F-35C Lightning IIs maintained their dominance of the coastal airspace. The stealth fighters acted as forward controllers, directing the Tomahawks to the highest priority targets. They identified mobile radar trucks that were attempting to hide under camouflage netting in the desert. With a single data burst, the coordinates were sent to the missiles already screaming through the air. The Iranian radar operators never saw the Tomahawks that ended their operational lives forever. The integration between the stealth pilots and the cruise missiles was a symphony of destruction. The Iranian military was being dismantled by a ghost-like enemy they could neither see nor touch. By 4:22 p.m., the Iranian Air Force attempted a desperate sortie from the inland base at Shiraz. 4 aging F-14 Tomcats and 6 F-4 Phantoms took to the sky in a final bid for relevance. They were detected by the Lincoln's E-2D Hawkeye long before their wheels left the runway. 2 divisions of Super Hornets were vectored to intercept them at a range of 80 miles out. The American pilots fired AM-120D missiles, utilizing their superior range and active radar seekers. The Iranian jets were swatted from the sky before they could even turn their own radars on. The brief air engagement was a grim reminder of the total air superiority held by the strike group. The 6th miscalculation was the assumption that the US Navy would only strike military targets. While the Navy avoided civilian areas, they targeted the economic engines of the Iranian military. The fuel refineries at Abadan that supplied the IRGC's fast boats were marked for destruction. 12 Tomahawks hit the primary distillation towers, sending a pillar of fire into the clouds. Without fuel, the remaining Iranian units on the coast were rendered immobile and useless. The Iranian military machine was being starved of its lifeblood in the middle of the battle. The strategic depth of the American strike plan left the Iranian regime with 0 viable options. At the port of Bandar Abbas, the destruction was so absolute, it defied the Iranian propaganda. The very pier where the IRGC had filmed their victory videos was now a pile of smoking rubble. The billboard in Tehran showing the Lincoln on fire stood in mocking contrast to the reality. On the ground, the Iranian people began to see the smoke rising from the coastal bases. The fear that the regime had used to maintain control was being replaced by the shock of defeat. The rain of 200 Tomahawks had silenced the propaganda machines as effectively as the radars. The Iranian government was losing its grip on the narrative and its grip on the Persian Gulf. At 4:26 p.m., the USS Abraham Lincoln conducted a high-speed turn to position for a final strike. The carrier's wake carved a massive white scar across the blue water of the Strait of Hormuz. Every sailor on the deck knew that the battle had transitioned from defense to total domination. The Iranian swarm was no longer a threat. It was a memory scattered across the sea floor. The destroyers Halsey and Spruance reported that their VLS cells were being readied for a third salvo. The American resolve was not wavering. It was intensifying as the final targets were confirmed. The world was watching the most lopsided naval engagement in the history of human conflict. The 8th wave of missiles targeted the regional command and control centers in southern Iran. These bunkers were the brains of the swarm, housing the officers who ordered the suicide charge. The Tomahawks struck with pinpoint accuracy, collapsing the roofs of the hardened facilities. The Iranian chain of command was shattered, leaving local units to fend for themselves. Without orders, the remaining coastal batteries stopped firing and abandoned their positions. The Iranian soldiers realized that to stay at their posts was to invite an immediate death sentence. The will to fight was evaporating as quickly as the Iranian Navy's influence over the region. The Lincoln's tactical officers began a BDA battle damage assessment of the entire theater. The results were staggering. Over 150 Iranian vessels sunk, 40 coastal batteries eliminated. The air defense network along the southern coast had been reduced to 0 operational sites. 5 major naval bases were now non-functional, and the regional headquarters was a ruin. The Iranian swarm had cost the regime more than they could ever hope to rebuild in a generation. The Lincoln and its escorts remained pristine, with 0 hits and 0 operational failures recorded. The American giant had not been exhausted. It had barely begun to exert its true military might. By the end of the second block, the regional balance of power had been permanently altered. The Strait of Hormuz was no longer a contested zone, but an American-controlled waterway. The Iranian dream of asymmetric victory had turned into a nightmare of systemic annihilation. The reign of 200 Tomahawks was nearing its conclusion, but the fire would burn for weeks. Admiral Richardson prepared his final orders to secure the area and begin the extraction. The propaganda billboard in Tehran still stood, but the world knew the truth of the battle. The carrier was a fortress, and the swarm was a ghost in the wind of American vengeance. At 4:28 p.m., the final wave of the American counteroffensive reached its terminal velocity. The sky above the Iranian mainland was etched with the silver streaks of 30 Tomahawks. These missiles were assigned to the most sensitive IRGC coordination centers in the south. With their GPS and inertial guidance systems locked, they performed a final lethal dive. Hardened command bunkers that were once thought impenetrable were reduced to dust and gravel. The architects of the swarm attack were silenced before they could transmit a retreat order. The Iranian military communications network suffered a total and irreversible systemic collapse. The seventh miscalculation was the belief that the American spirit would break under a swarm. Instead of retreat, the IRGC faced a military force that had reached its highest efficiency. The USS Abraham Lincoln functioned as a perfect hub of integrated, multi-domain warfare. The F-35C Lightning IIs remained on station, monitoring every movement on the desert floor. Any vehicle attempting to escape the destroyed bases was identified and neutralized instantly. The American response was not a mere retaliation, but a surgical removal of a threat. The regional power of the Revolutionary Guard had been decapitated in under 30 minutes. At 4:32 p.m., a Marine Force recon team was authorized for a lightning raid on Abu Musa. 6 AH-1Z Viper attack helicopters departed the USS Makin Island to secure the island. They targeted the remaining Iranian signal intelligence towers and drone control stations. The Vipers used Hellfire missiles to erase the last vestige of Iranian presence on the rock. The elite Marines fast-roped onto the smoking ruins to capture sensitive encryption hardware. This was a clear message that no Iranian territory in the Gulf was safe from American reach. The invulnerable island fortresses of the IRGC were now under the boots of US Marines. The cost of the Iranian gamble was becoming a permanent scar on the nation's military history. Total Iranian casualties were estimated at over 3,500 personnel across all coastal sectors. The IRGC Navy had lost its entire flagship fleet and every modern corvette in its inventory. $5 billion in naval infrastructure was gone, with no hope of replacement or repair. The Iranian people watched from the shores as the black smoke drifted toward the horizon. The regime's promise of a new era of maritime dominance had ended in a watery grave. The sea was littered with the wreckage of 200 boats that had dared to test a superpower. At 4:35 p.m., the USS Abraham Lincoln conducted a victory lap through the center of the strait. The carrier sailed through the debris of the destroyed swarm with its battle ensign flying. Every sailor on deck stood as a witness to the total dominance of American naval aviation. The escort destroyers maintained a protective screen, though no enemies remained to fight. The rain of 200 Tomahawks had finished its work, leaving a silence that was deafening. The international shipping lanes were declared open for commercial traffic once again. Global oil markets, which had spiked in the first minutes, began a rapid and steady decline. The propaganda billboard in Tehran was finally torn down by a mob of disillusioned citizens. The image of the burning Lincoln had become a symbol of the regime's fatal and costly lies. The truth of the battle had spread, despite the government's attempt to censor the internet. Videos from American drones showed the utter helplessness of the Iranian fast boat fleet. The people realized that their leaders had sacrificed an entire generation of sailors for a lie. The sour of the wind had indeed reaped a whirlwind that threatened to consume the state. The Iranian government entered a period of internal chaos and urgent diplomatic pleading. In the Pentagon, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff provided the final battle report. The blockade is broken, the Iranian Navy is non-existent, our strike group is unharmed. The President of the United States addressed the nation with a tone of grim determination. We did not seek this conflict, but we have finished it with overwhelming and total force. The message was heard in every capital around the world, from Moscow to Beijing. The American carrier remains the ultimate instrument of national policy and global stability. No amount of low-cost drones can replace the power of a trained and equipped battle group. The Abraham Lincoln Strike Group moved into the open waters of the Arabian Sea for recovery. The F-35s and Super Hornets landed one by one, their mission of destruction finally complete. Ground crews worked with tireless efficiency to refuel and rearm the jets for the next watch. Admiral Richardson took a moment to look out at the horizon from the carrier's flag bridge. He knew that the peace of the strait had been bought with the fire of 200 missiles. The freedom of navigation was not a gift, but a right defended by the strength of the Navy. The Lincoln would remain on station, a silent guardian against any future naval madness. Never believe that a swarm of fiberglass can defeat a wall of American high-tech Aegis steel. Never assume that the United States will allow its fusileros to be trapped or threatened. The rain of fire is the final answer to those who believe they can bully the free world. 62 missiles were launched by Iran, but 336 precision weapons were returned in vengeance. 15 bases are gone, and a navy that took 40 years to build was lost in 29 minutes. The Iranian dream of a closed strait has become a permanent nightmare of total defeat. The carrier sails on, the water remains open, and the world remembers the day of fire.